The Ranger's Nightmare. I never believed in the legends. I spent 15 years as a park ranger in the Northern Cascades, and I'd seen it all. Lost hikers, bear attacks, even the occasional mountain lion encounter. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened in the winter of 22. It started with a missing person. A solo camper, Alan Harker, who had gone off-trail near Frozen Lake. His girlfriend reported him missing after he failed to check in. We set out in a search party, expecting the usual. A lost, frostbitten hiker, maybe a twisted ankle. What we found instead still haunts me. We discovered his campsite about 5 miles into the forest. His tent was torn apart, not slashed like a bear attack, but shredded. Long gashes through the thick fabric as if something with immense strength had ripped it apart. His supplies were scattered, and the snow around the site was disturbed with massive footprints. Too big for any human, too deep to be a hoax. Then we found the blood. A trail of it led away from the camp, dark and congealed in the frozen air. We followed it for nearly a mile, our breath pluming in the bitter cold, the crunch of our boots the only sound. Then we saw it. Alan Harker's body was propped against a tree, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His face was frozen in an expression of sheer horror, eyes wide, mouth open. His arms were outstretched, fingers curled as if he had been reaching for something, or trying to fight something off. And there were more footprints. They circled the body, massive impressions in the snow, each nearly twice the size of my own boot. We radioed for evacuation, but before we could turn back, something moved in the trees. A dark figure, massive, just beyond the ridge. It stood there, silent, watching us. Even from a distance, I could see its breath fogging in the cold air. The others saw it too. No one spoke, no one moved. Then it let out a sound, a deep guttural growl that rumbled through the trees like distant thunder. I've heard bears, I've heard wolves. This was neither. We ran. I don't remember the sprint back to base, only that we made it, panting and shaking. The official report stated fatal encounter with an unknown predator. No mention of the footprints, no mention of the thing in the trees. But we knew. I left the ranger service that summer. Sometimes I still hear that growl in my nightmares, and every winter when the snow falls deep in the Cascades, I wonder, who else is out there watching? The Beast of Blackwood Ridge. I've worked as a park ranger for nearly 2 decades. In that time, I've dealt with mountain lions, bears, and even a few desperate people who thought the wilderness would keep their secrets. But nothing, not the harsh winters, nor the deep, endless woods, ever unsettled me the way Blackwood Ridge did. It was late December 2018, just before a heavy snowstorm rolled in. A call came through. 2 hunters, Ray Dobbs and Mark Lasky, had failed to check in. They had headed into the back country 3 days prior, planning to set up camp near Devil's Hollow. When their families didn't hear from them, we were sent in. I knew the area well. Devil's Hollow was remote, dense pines, rocky cliffs, and snow so deep it swallowed the sound of your own footsteps. If someone got lost out there, their chances of survival were slim. We assumed the hunters had gotten turned around or injured. We set out before dawn, 5 of us on snowmobiles, making our way through the thick woods. Within 2 hours, we found their camp, or what was left of it. The tent was in shreds, not torn down by wind or careless handling, but ripped, huge gashes through the thick canvas, as if something had torn it apart with claws. The hunters' gear was scattered in every direction, some of it buried under fresh snowfall. Their rifles were still there, one of them snapped clean in half. But there was no blood. A set of footprints, far larger than any humans, led away from the camp. They were deep, spaced far apart, as if whatever made them had a long stride. The prints led toward the trees, disappearing into the deeper part of the forest. We followed. An hour later, we found Ray Dobbs. He was slumped against a tree, eyes frozen open, lips parted as if mid-scream. His arms were stretched out in front of him, fingers curled. His face, God, his face. The terror in his lifeless eyes was something I'll never forget. But there were no visible wounds, no blood, just frozen in place, as if whatever he had seen had scared him to death. Mark was nowhere to be found. We radioed back, but before we could call for evacuation, a sound cut through the cold air. A deep, guttural growl, low, resonant, nothing like a bear or wolf. It came from the ridge above us, where the tree line thickened. And then we saw it. A massive figure standing between the trees. 8, maybe 9 feet tall, covered in thick, dark fur. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, its arms long. But what I'll never forget were its eyes, small, sunken, and pale, reflecting the dim light like a predator in the night. For a moment, it just stood there, watching. Then it moved. Not in the slow, lumbering way you'd expect something that size to move, but quick, fluid. It ducked behind the trees, disappearing before we could react. The sound of snapping branches followed, moving away from us. But the feeling it left in the air was heavy. We grabbed Ray's body and got the hell out of there. The official report listed hypothermia as the cause of death. Mark Lasky was never found. His case remains open. I quit the ranger service that spring. Some things in the woods aren't meant to be understood. And some things, I think, prefer to be left alone. The Silent Watcher. I've been a ranger in the Rockies for nearly 15 years. I've seen the worst nature has to offer. Avalanches, blizzards, predators. But there's one thing that still keeps me up at night. One thing that made me rethink everything I thought I knew about the wilderness. It happened in January of 2021. A pair of experienced hikers, a father and son, had gone missing near Ironwood Pass. Their last known location was a remote stretch of trail known for its brutal conditions and sudden storms. We assumed they had gotten lost or injured. Standard search and rescue procedure. We were wrong. On the second day of searching, we found their camp. The tent was still standing, half buried in snow. Their packs were there, undisturbed. A small fire pit, cold and covered in frost, told us they hadn't been gone long. But there was no sign of them. No footprints leading away, no struggle. Just absence. And then we noticed something else. The trees. Around the camp, every tree within a 30-foot radius had deep, jagged scratches carved into the bark, huge, uneven gouges higher than any bear could reach. Some cuts were fresh, others older, almost ancient. The sight of them made my stomach turn. Something had been watching them. Something had marked this place. We pressed on. About a mile from the camp, we found the son. He was curled at the base of a tree, half buried in snow, his face frozen in an expression of pure horror. His hands were clenched so tightly that his fingernails had dug into his palms. But there were no wounds on him, no sign of what had killed him. His father was nowhere to be found. That's when we heard it. A deep, rhythmic breathing. Not from us, something else, hidden just beyond the trees. It was slow, measured, like something massive was exhaling in the cold. The sound was so low it felt like it was vibrating in my chest. We stood frozen, listening. Then the breathing stopped, and the forest went completely silent. Not the normal silence of winter. No wind, no rustling branches, no distant animal calls, just nothing. A vacuum of sound like the world itself was holding its breath. Then, from somewhere deeper in the trees, we heard the crunch of snow. One step, then another, coming closer. We didn't wait. We grabbed the boy's body and ran. The feeling of being watched was unbearable, pressing against my back like a physical weight. I refused to look behind me. By the time we reached base, I could barely breathe. We called in more teams to search for the father, but they never found him. No tracks, no blood, just his empty campsite and the carved-up trees. The official report said the boy died of exposure. His father was declared missing, presumed dead. But I know the truth. Something else was out there, and it was waiting. The beast in the snow. I've been a park ranger in the Rockies for nearly 15 years. I've seen it all. Poachers, lost hikers, even a guy who tried to live out here off the grid. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened in the winter of 2019. It started with a call from a group of campers near Grand Lake. They reported hearing strange howls at night, deep, guttural sounds that didn't match any animal in these parts. Wolves don't make noises like that. Neither do mountain lions. I figured it might be an elk with a throat infection or some other natural explanation. I was wrong. I drove out alone, snow crunching under my tires. The temperature had dropped to near zero, and a blizzard was rolling in from the north. I found the campers, 2 men and a woman, huddled in their tent, pale and shaking. They told me something had been circling their campsite all night, moving just beyond the fire's reach. They saw its silhouette, tall, massive, walking upright. One of them swore he heard it whisper his name. I checked the perimeter and found tracks in the fresh snow. They were huge, each print nearly twice the size of my boot, with deep impressions like something impossibly heavy had passed through. The stride was too long for a human, and whatever made them wasn't wearing shoes. Bare feet. In sub-zero temperatures. A cold sweat broke out down my back. I followed the tracks about 50 yards into the trees before they suddenly stopped. No sign of struggle, no alternate path, nothing. It was as if whatever made them had just vanished. I decided not to tell the campers what I'd seen. I told them to pack up and leave immediately. I escorted them back to their car and watched them drive away, their headlights swallowed by the endless dark. I should have left too. Instead, I went back to check the site one more time before the storm hit. The fire was out, but something had disturbed the ashes, long, deep claw marks in the dirt, like something had been digging, looking for something, or someone. Then I heard it, a low growl. Not close, but not far enough away either. My breath turned to mist as I slowly reached for my flashlight. I swung the beam around. Nothing but trees and snow. Then I caught movement, something huge shifting between the trunks. It was watching me. I heard heavy breathing, the kind that comes from massive lungs. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I tried to focus, and then I saw it, a figure, taller than any man, covered in thick, matted fur. Its eyes reflected the light in an unnatural way, too intelligent, too knowing. Its arms were long, almost reaching its knees, and its fingers ended in curved black claws. My heart pounded in my ears. Then it moved, not running, not walking, gliding like it barely touched the ground. It was too fast, too silent for something that size. My body screamed at me to run, but I was frozen. It stopped just at the edge of my light's reach, cocking its head as if studying me, testing me. And then, in a deep guttural voice, it spoke. Not words, not exactly. A mimicry of them. A horrible, fragmented repetition of something I'd said earlier. Should have left. My legs finally obeyed, and I sprinted back to my truck, slipping on ice, crashing through the underbrush. I didn't dare look back. I didn't stop until I was miles away, engine roaring as I tore down the mountain road. I never went back to that campsite. When I filed my report, I left out the details. No one would believe me, but I know what I saw. And I know it's still out there, somewhere in those endless snow-covered trees, waiting for the next fool who doesn't leave in time. Title, Frozen Silence. I've been a ranger in the Cascades for years, long enough to know that the mountains hold secrets. People vanish out here all the time. Some slip on ice, some get lost, but there are others, those whose disappearances don't make sense. I never believed in the stories, not until last winter. It was mid-February, and a solo hiker had gone missing near Mount Baker, a guy named Jake Palmer. He was experienced, knew the terrain, but his last GPS ping showed him way off the trail, deep in the backcountry. Too deep. The search had already gone on for 3 days. The team was exhausted, and the storm rolling in meant we'd have to call it soon. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I volunteered to take one last look. I set out just before dusk, following his last known coordinates. The wind howled through the trees, thick snowflakes falling fast. About 2 miles in, I found something that made my stomach drop. His camp. It was destroyed. The tent was shredded, supplies scattered, blood, small drops leading into the woods. And the worst part? His footprints were there, but so were something else's. Massive, deep, not human. I drew my rifle and followed the tracks, heart pounding. They led me through the trees, just up toward a ridge, and then nothing. The tracks stopped, no signs of a struggle, no alternate path, just a dead end, as if something had lifted him straight into the air. That's when I heard it. A sound I will never forget. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was laughter. Low, guttural, like something was trying to sound human and failing. The trees around me groaned as if something massive was moving between them. I turned, shining my light, and there it was, towering. Matted fur coated in ice, black eyes that reflected the beam like a predator's. Its mouth stretched too wide, lips curling into something that almost looked like a grin. Then it spoke, not in words, in mimicry. My own voice echoed back at me. Help me. Please. It was Jake's voice. I ran. I don't remember making it back to my truck. I only remember the feeling of being chased. The sense that if I slowed down even for a second, something would drag me into the abyss. We never found Jake Palmer. The search was called off. The official report blamed the weather. But I know the truth. Something else lives in these mountains, and it's still watching.